I'm Rob Claus with the Certified Commercial Property Inspectors Association, and this is a Member Spotlight. From time to time, I get this opportunity to highlight a member of our association for no other reason but to talk about their story. And today I'm talking with Jeff Crabtree of SureGuard Property Inspections. Jeff has been a member for just barely over a year. I met him in a 3-day introduction to commercial property inspections course. And what's interesting for me and exciting for me to share is in this year plus, not much more, he's grown to almost double-digit inspections per month. Jeff came into this industry fresh, not a home inspector, was not working in the inspection industry at all. He started SureGuard from scratch just over a year ago. And so I wanted to share his journey, his story, and maybe a little bit about how he did what he did, why he did what he did, and what his plans are. I think this is exciting for us all to listen to. And so with that, let's welcome Jeff Crabtree to Building Your Business with the CCPIA Member Spotlight. Jeff, thank you for taking some time today and I guess meeting us here on the Member Spotlight.
Appreciate that, Rob. It is good to be on here and always happy to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, the reason we reached out is it's tough enough to run a business. But when you think about starting a business from scratch, it's almost daunting. And in the last just a skosh over a year, you've gone from no business to a fairly arguably successful business. And that's what I want to talk about today. So congratulations on all this effort.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's been a journey, but I've gotten great guidance along the way. I certainly have not done it by myself.
So I guess let's begin with your journey. Can you spend a couple of minutes and tell us, what your background is prior to being a commercial property inspector?
Sure, no, happy to. So I really was with corporate America my entire adult life. Was always with real estate operations. So that's, construction, facilities, and then portfolio management kind of wrapped into one, with facilities management really being my true forte. Spent a long time with Walmart with their facilities services and asset management squad. They had me all over the place, both coasts, both borders, and everywhere in between. Learned a lot there. That's a very busy environment. They've changed some things on most of their stores with hours, but back then it was 24/7, retail environment, and came with it a lot of hand grenades being tossed into your lap and a lot of hatchets being thrown at your head. But you just got to be okay with that kind of stuff to thrive in facilities management. But also spent after Walmart a couple of years with private equity, and particularly certain holdings within those groups. And yeah, truthfully, I loved it and still do. I've got a great peer network back there, a lot of wonderful friends. But I had always, especially in the last few years, just had it on the top of my mind that I really want to break out and have the freedom and flexibility. And what I mean by that is it's not some of these silly things that you hear on TV and whatnot of, oh, I don't have a boss, I'm my own boss. I'm fine with people that, run that course. I'm not stopping them. But for me, in my book, I've got plenty of bosses. And that's because if I have clients, if I have peers that are relying on me for anything, well, then I've got plenty of bosses that I still answer to. But it's really around having the freedom and flexibility of choosing the work that I feel good about and want to go after, working with people that I want to work with, and vice versa, they want to work with me. Rallying behind initiatives that I feel good about, and not really having to get involved with, the things that I don't want to get involved in. So that's what I mean by the freedom.
We met in, I believe it was April of 25 at a 3-day introduction to commercial property inspections course. Is that correct?
Nope, you're right. It was. And that was in Alpharetta, actually, right outside of Atlanta. Yes, sir.
So what what took you from your corporate America side to, boy, I want to get into commercial property inspections? What was that conversation you had with yourself and that genesis?
Sure. So great question. Again, I'd been thinking about this for quite a while. So this wasn't like a knee jerk reaction, off the rip or anything, but there were some things that had happened, in my family's life. And it really, caused me to take a pause from corporate America. And, I needed to be there at a time, for, my mother at a point in her life where she needed somebody the most. And so I'd really, hit the pause button anyways and taken a leave of absence, if you will. And, during that time, I just made the decision that this is the right time to go ahead and make this switch over permanent and just run with it. And so I'd already had, a pretty good idea in my head as to how I wanted things to be structured, where I really wanted the focus to be. I, you know, being from that corporate world of multi-location, institutions and companies, buildings was just a natural fit. And so all I really did was I took a couple of aspects out of my responsibilities and I carved them out and really rolled them into a business. And so, maybe in corporate America, they might not call them property inspections. That doesn't matter. That's kind of here nor there. Some of them call them property walks. Some of them call them site visits. That's for me, tomato, tomato. It's, very similar. And that's not to take away from any standard of procedure. But truthfully, when you look at a lot of SOPs, whether they're internal for a corporation or whether it's for an organization like CCPIA, you're going to see that there's a lot of shared methodologies and there's a lot of shared similarities as to what we're looking at, how we're supposed to be looking at it, and then, how we're evaluating it, on the back end for, a report that's going to go to a stakeholder. So I'm not trying to come across as, oh, I know it all. I don't know it all. My cup's not even close to being full now. I'm a dummy. But that's what, really drove me to want to, sit in and take that 3-day course. And I've taken a few other courses, since then in person. You and I met out in Phoenix. That was a great, class out there on about a 250,000 square foot, I think, Class A 12-story office tower downtown Phoenix. But I think that anybody can get a gold nugget or two out of any learning situation. And even if it is a subject that maybe you're familiar with, there's nothing wrong with knocking off some rust and, relearning it, if you will. And if anything, just from a different perspective. But that's really, all I did was take certain components, such as running numbers, cost tables. Instead of doing it for internal team members over there at, finance or whatnot, now I'm doing it, externally, on the client level. And it's really the same thing with the property inspections. But what I fell in love with about CCPIA, was really the structure, the formatting, the standard, and the process. And I give a lot of respect to that. And so that's really what, sold me on becoming a member.
Well, I think to that point, I think there has to be some congruency between corporate, at least communication, and the private sector, what we're doing as a private inspector, because without that congruency, there'll be a huge communication gap. And you're a perfect testimony of how you're able to bridge those two levels of communication and build a business on that, where a business did not exist either in your life or in the stakeholders that hire you.
Now, that's a good point. It is. And, the conjectures are, far and many and wide, and that maybe the objectives are a little different. So, maybe out here in the commercial real estate world, 80, 90% of inspections are going to be, around a transaction. Fair enough. Very, typical, very, very common. And maybe in the corporate world, it's not so much about, a transaction, say an acquisition. Maybe it's going to be for a remodel that's taking place in 2 years. The truth is that most large scale multi location companies, they know that they're going to remodel a particular unit, whether it's every 8 to 10 years, every 5, kind of depends on the company and, what they want that to look like. But the point is that in the corporate world, as we get closer to that targeted remodel date, we're starting to lay even more eyes on it to see if maybe we need to change scope of work, add something in, maybe back something out, although that rarely happens. It's usually the other way, where we're trying to fit things into the remodel that, aren't really in it at this point. So when you're getting, say, about 2 years out, you're starting to visit that particular remodel location, on a more frequent basis. And that's just so that we can finalize what that scope is going to look like. So you're right. There's a lot of similarities. And so although objectives might change, and sometimes, different objectives will change, how we're doing things or what the approach is or what we're going to do. But by far and large, when we talk about what is the present condition of an HVAC system, for example, the objective probably isn't going to have that much impact as to whether we're determining it to be good, fair, form, whatnot. I'd say that in my experience, the only caveats to that is that, let's just pick on a roof that, it's clearly at the end of its, useful life. Well, maybe the client isn't, particularly interested in that. And, that might sound kind of crazy, but I mean, there's situations like that out there where that's not really, too important, to them. Maybe if it's, non-bearing, partition walls or something where they're planning on demoing it out anyway. So I'm just kind of, giving some examples where, sure, a lot of times objective really does have an impact as to how that inspection's going to play out. But my experience says that in general, when you're following a standard of procedure and you're really, doing your best to follow it to a T, and there's not that many deviations that you and the client have agreed to, well, then you're really looking at everything, every building system very similarly, no matter what the location is or what the occupancy type is or what the construction type is.
I agree. So we'll revisit this. I know. Let's shift a little bit. And as I introduced you, I said that we've only met in April of 25, and at the time of this recording, we're in the third quarter of 26, and in that short period of time, you've gone from 0 to almost predictably double-digit inspections per month. Let's walk through that journey of the first couple of months of what you did to get to where you started really hitting the gas pedal and getting moving. Can you kind of share that journey a little bit from the crawl, walk, run perspective?
Sure. No, happy to. It's scary. I mean, it's scary now. It really is. But yeah, year ago, I was really, questioning myself. I don't mind saying it that, have you really made the right decision here? And should you hop back into the corporate ring? But, you know, it really started with facilities condition assessments. And that's really what was keeping SureGuard going. And I don't want to deviate too much, but, an FCA is, a little different than a baseline, property inspection, and that you're really going down the road of asset life cycle costing and whatnot. There's some other components to it also, but it's pretty heavy on that for most FCAs. So that's really what SureGuard started into, getting into the transactional environment, which was what I really had always, planned on steering the company towards. That took some time and that took some investment. So, I certainly relied on some peers back in the corporate world to, make a few introductions. There's no shame in that. But then I also just took it upon myself to spend a lot of time beginning to network the old fashioned way. I'm not against email blasts or anything like that. All of these things I know, can be proven to be effective. It's true. But now I'm just showing my age that no, I'm going to go to that conference or that expo or that chapter meeting. And I'm just going to shake hands and embarrass myself and get to know people. But so, for example, you take BOMA, that's Building Owners and Managers Association. Been a part of them for a long time. Truthfully, I'd lost touch, with BOMA over the years, but I got re-involved, with them. CCIM. I mean, in the world of CRE, they're pretty much at the top of the food chain in a lot of people's eyes when it comes to what that credential looks like in the process that people that earn that designation, have to go through. BOMA is not easy either. I'm a BOMA SMA, and by no means is that, an easy credential or designation to get. But those two, organizations in particular, I've spent a lot of time getting reacquainted and reconnected within BOMA, and then also as a new face within CCIM, and particularly the Georgia chapter, which you might as well call it the Atlanta chapter, and the Alabama chapter, and then the Florida chapter, which for me is the Panhandle. But it's just that older approach, I guess, where I'm going to spend the time on the old-fashioned way of networking, and I'm a believer in it. There's other ways to do it too, and I know that. And I'm not saying that I don't partake in that, but I'm just a big believer in networking that way. And it didn't happen overnight. It's not that I went to a couple of CCIM, meetings and became an affiliate member, and voila, the phone started ringing. No, breaking through that was challenging just to get those first couple of opportunities, and then just creating that workflow and that communication process from, just call it wreck the check, from the moment that the phone rang or the email, came in, all the way up to the very end, after the post inspection consultation, what that process needed to look like. And I'm not saying I didn't change it any, but I really borrowed it from what I'd always done in the corporate world. And I'll just say it that if anybody wants to say that I over communicate, I'll take that problem all day long, then go in the other direction, that we can't get a
Mm-hmm.
hold of this guy. We email him. He doesn't email us back, etc. I don't want that problem. I'll take it the other way. And so I just feel that that's a big piece, is keeping the communication going and active listening. Um, when you've got somebody on the phone, whether it's their broker, principal, whether it's their attorney, whoever's representing them that you're working with, and if you want to say through to that end client, if you just actively listen, you're going to probably get about 90% of what you need to know, and then ask some probing questions just to clarify and confirm a few things. But if you just actively listen, more times than not, the person on the other end of the call, they're going to tell you just about 90% of what it is you need to know. So I try to make that a point, make that an effort on any communication piece. And, things started picking up in the transactional space, by taking that approach, speaking their language, whether it's finance, whether it's, construction, which, I'm a little careful on that because more times than not, my end user client and their broker is probably not, an engineer or an architect. So there's no need to bore them with that kind of vernacular. But speaking their language goes a long ways, and that helps to build confidence for them, trust, and then also your own brand and reputation.
When you mentioned that you've taken some courses, I know we did the 3-day intro. I know you did the 2-day mock inspection in Georgia. what other resources did you lean into or rely on from the CCPIA that helped you launch and then subsequently helped you start to grow and get some momentum in your business?
Sure. So besides the core offering, how to inspect, whether we're talking roofs or, parking lots, whatnot, there's, I almost hesitate, Rob, to even call them peripherals because sometimes that seems to kind of marginalize something. But, just for the conversation, I'll call them the peripherals, such as just, a lot of call them business intelligence, strategies and tools. Whether, you're looking at a SWOT analysis on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, whether you're looking at a conversion, spreadsheet, there's a lot of tools that CCPIA website has on it that go well beyond, the classic, here's how to inspect a parking lot. And it's those peripherals that I got just as much benefit. I don't want to say I got more benefit, but I got just as much benefit out of those kinds of classes than I did on, what I call the core subjects. Even, guidance, and it is guidance on how to structure your business. CCPI can't tell anybody how they should structure their business. Absolutely not. They can't tell an inspector what they should quote any particular, project or job at, but there's good guidance out there as to how to start getting the wheel turning up here and how to come up with, logical thought process that's going to, one, keep you competitive. So now we're talking pricing, but then, on the other side, you know, getting the wheels turning on what kind of business structure, you might be looking at, what you should be considering for, say, insurance and appropriate coverage. So it's tools like that that I'm going to call the peripherals, of which there's a library of them on CCPIA. And I get just as much use out of those than I do on the core off.
Well, that's great to hear. Because I mean, I know a lot of efforts placed in them, but beyond that, they're all genesis on past experiences. All of the team that creates those things has made those ventures before, and for somebody, I'm going to use you as an example that's just had a 1 year anniversary. You don't have to go into this with a blindfold running through a forest and smacking trees. And you can lean into some of these resources and pick and choose. There's no mandates. And that's the wonderful thing about it. There's no mandates, but at least you know that there's stuff out there that you can that has garnered other people's success.
Absolutely. Nobody, if I can do it, anybody can. Um, I didn't have to invent the wheel. I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. It was really already there. It was a thing of taking the time to understand what's valuable to me on that offering on CCPIA website, and what I can utilize and what I can implement into SureGuard's approach to the business. And it's always evolving. So things that maybe I didn't pay that much attention to before on the website, CCPI website, sure, maybe 6 months ago, that wasn't something that was really at the top of my mind, but now it is.
What I want to go back to is some of those baby steps. And I know you mentioned website. Did did you build a website right away, or was this something that evolved and you said, well, maybe I need one?
You know what? No, so I actually did have one built like right away. This is a good one. I'm glad you asked. A 16-year-old kid built my website. So long of it short,
Way to go.
old Walmart. Yes, she's 16. Seriously. And she did a phenomenal job. Okay. And so, just a, privacy protection and confidentiality. I won't name drop on here, but 16-year-old high school kid out in Bentonville, Arkansas, former Walmart buddy of mine from the old days. I was, he knew what I was doing with SureGuard, and was talking to him that, yeah, I've got to, I'm trying to vet a suitable vendor to build me a website, and there's 5 million of them, and he said, "Well, would you want my daughter to build it?" Sure. I mean, I've got nothing to lose, at this point. And so long of it short, a 16-year-old high school student built my website. She did a phenomenal job. She really did. I have had some work done to it since, some, SEO and some web marketing services. I'll give, Paige and the team at Ringtree a shout out. That I did engage her, for a little bit of muscle, to be thrown into it to make some enhancements and changes. But the website started out with a 16-year-old kid in Bentonville, and I have to say she did a phenomenal job doing it.
When on your website, and I've seen it, and we've talked about your website, and I like it. I liked the original incarnation. I like the enhancements you've done to it. Let's talk a little bit about the client engagement through that. Your call to actions. Are you getting a lot of proposal requests from your website, or is this client calls coming in?
So there's a mixture there. I do get, submittals on, inquiries that, come in, and I've had, CCPIA, certainly, engage me and put me in touch, with inquiries through, that platform. But I would say that most of them really are, phone calls. They are. And, I think people like to have at least a baseline, conversation. And so I'm just always kind of in a mental state of preparation to have that. But it really is a mixture between calls coming in, inquiry forms directly off of the SureGuard website, and then CCPIA, of course. But yeah, I'd pick one out of them all that comes in a little more. It's going to be the phone.
What has been your closure rate so far?
Now, great question. So that's something that let me rephrase. If you ask me that, say 2 years from now, I might give you a different answer. Okay. But out the gates, essentially, year in a little bit more into this, my closure rate right now is hovering anywhere between just say 85 to 92%. So I'm pretty happy about that. I'm trending that out for the rest of the year. Um, it goes back to that communication piece that we were talking about earlier, that active listening component, and then speaking their language. I don't have an expectation that brokers and principals or their lawyer, sometimes speaks my language. I have to speak theirs, and so that's how I try to keep the engagement, clutched in. But yeah, so pretty happy with the conversion rate at this point.
I think that's fabulous. I think the follow up I have to that is on your closures. Are they on the phone or are they post proposal submittal?
So yeah, good question. And there's a bit of a split there. It kind of comes in spurts where for a couple of weeks, I'll get, commitment, right there on the phone. And then, there's a spurt where this is taking place by way of some back and forth emails. And then, we'll, have the proposal agreement, that's been memorialized. I'd say a lot of it depends on what's the project type. And I'm not marginalizing any project. Absolutely not. But, I will say that when let's just say it's a smaller property, I'd say that it flies through or goes through the workflow process a little faster after having one or two conversations with their broker. If it's a larger, project, I just got, commitment this week on about a 120,000 square foot warehouse outside of Atlanta. Those take a little bit longer. There's a few more moving parts to it. So I'd say a lot of it comes down to the project type.
Yeah, because I know in conversations you and I've had over the past year plus that you've had some fairly, I don't want to say large, but a lot of moving parts, a lot of different levels of commitment between like multifamily or multi-property or multi-locational jobs, I could see those requiring a little bit more sales effort and a little bit more back and forth than, let's say, the single spot, single building, single ownership type buildings.
Yeah, when you start getting a few players in the algorithm, it does, elongate out the process, but it's really to be expected. Organizations are going to have a reasonable level of protection for themselves, whether it's vetting, whether it's underwriting, pick one. I don't want to rant, but I'll just say it this way. The larger the organization, the longer the vetting and the longer the process, and the smaller the organization, well, then, things might, kind of happen a little bit, quicker and sooner. I've seen small, local banks that, you know, things kind of fly right through pretty quick. And then you start getting in with some of the larger ones, and it takes a little while on their underwriting. So, I think it's a fair state.
Well, I think then that goes to that testimony of why that active listening is so important. Because if you sit there with your feet squished so deeply rooted into the sand and you don't possess that business flexibility, and you go, this is how I do it, this is how I do it, this is how I do it, you're not going to be as successful as, let me listen to what you need, and then how can I fit to your needs?
Yeah, that's a big component of it. And this kind of touches back to what we had talked about earlier, even with objectives. Earlier I'd said that, I'd say all in all, the objective itself, in my experience, doesn't have a huge impact all in all on how I'm going to be performing an inspection. That being said, there's caveats. I did an inspection for a sale-leaseback, very recently for a large multi-location coffee chain that, most of us know. And but long of it short, they had just had the roof replaced, and both warranties. So we're talking about manufacturer warranty for the single ply and the workmanship, craftsmanship, or labor warranty for installer. Both warranties attached to the property address, not who owns it. Fully transferable. So in that situation, the buyer, it's not that they didn't want me to go up to the roof at all. No, I had to go up there. They had, RTU up there. But the point is they weren't that concerned with the roof because it had just been re-roofed like less than 90 days ago. So, I think that that's a good caveat example when we talk about objective, when we talk about what the terms of that lease would look like should that sale leaseback go through and close. That particular buyer wasn't overly concerned about the lease because, one, it's a triple N lease, which already means that the tenant is, going to be responsible. Two, it's a brand new roof that is attached to the property address. So, I'm just kind of using that as a little example of, you got to listen into these things to really pay attention to what's important to the client. And that doesn't mean that if you see something major, that is, imminent danger to life and health, or it's going to cost a pretty penny. No, you should definitely be calling that out also. But you definitely want to capture what it is that the client, has made clear that they want to see.
Absolutely. On the conversation of marketing, sales is what we do on the phone. Sales is how we close our leads. Sales is how we basically put the money in the cash register. But the marketing is what drove somebody into, and we're going to call it your store, into your inspection company. You mentioned, very quickly that you reached out to Paige and her team at Tree Ring. I'll never ask you about money. I'll never ask you about spend. But I am going to ask you about success. For those that don't think it's important to invest, how's that worked out for you?
I'm going to start it with this. I was a naysayer. Coming into this, I know what the internet is and that websites are important. And, I already said that I had a kit build mine. It was something that I really wasn't that concerned about. and that I didn't give enough attention to. And as things were kind of evolving, I realized that this is a gap that I really have to address. And either I can get left behind or I can address the gap and, come up with identify a solution that's going to cover the gap. And it's probably the single best investment that I've made since opening the doors of SureGuard was engaging, Tree Ring and Paige. So the question was, has it, what's been the impact? I've had true measurable impact. I don't mean just slightly, moving the needle a little bit or something like that. I've had consistent lift on that. And it's really taught me a lot that no matter what my personal feelings are, I already shared with you that I like to go to these, chapter meetings and shake hands and whatnot. I'm never going to give that up, but I do understand the importance of having a relevant, meaningful, searchable website. And that taught me a lot with that experience. And so I'll tell anybody, do your shopping, do your vetting, have a budget that, you can work with. Don't let it swallow you whole, but make the investment if you're not already. I had to learn that lesson.
And probably a better comment would be make the right investment.
Yeah.
Because you just can't throw money at marketing foolishly. You have to know strategically where to place it, and I think that's what you did, because I mean, obviously the proof is in the pudding, or the fruits. So the fruits are in your labor. It's working for you.
I appreciate it, but that's a great team over there, with Paige and that crew. And you're right, it's about making the wise and smart, prudent investment. And it took me a minute, to get around to that. It really did. Like I said, it wasn't, on the front burner for me when I started this.
We do these member spotlights from time to time. I don't do them on a regular basis. I do them when somebody such as yourself, Jeff, spark something for me, or has a story that needs to be shared. And so, at here at the closing of this, what advice would you give your previous self? That person a year ago, April, if you could talk to yourself today, then, of what you know today, what would you say would be the best advice you could give yourself?
Building your brand day one, starting that immediately. Don't think that, you can get to that next month or whatever. Your brand is your reputation, and it's what's gonna, either make you or break you. And everyone has bad days and bad months. Sure, we work in an industry that's like that, where there's plenty of potholes in it. But build your brand, and don't just start building it on day one, but make that a constant, constant, process, where it's never really ending. But it was on my mind, but truthfully, I wasn't really spending enough time on that, say, a year before, I opened up SureGuard. And, I'm not saying I waited too late to start that, but in hindsight, I wish that I had started on that component earlier, because, and I want to be careful. I give a nod of respect to anybody out there making an honest living, but I really try to mimic my clientele. I make that a big point. So whether it reflects in my website, whether it reflects in the conversations with me, how I position myself, I really like to reflect my typical client base. And so, my suggestion would be a mirror. Be a mirror of who it is that you want to do business with.
I love that. I absolutely love that, Jeff. I think that's the right way to look at it.
Well, I read it in a fortune cookie for lunch. So
It's there's there was and I don't want to say this to sound glib or contrite, but I mean, there's actually an article on the sales approach on the CCPIA website that talks about that, on how you can affect the outcome by mirroring those that are looking to purchase your product. So, let's say I'm selling, selling cups. If I can project the way a cup should be drank and who uses a cup in a very exciting way, then those that are producing the cups are going to go, wow, this is who I want to associate with. And so, I mean, I think that's awesome, Jeff, that you're thinking that way. Now let me ask one more question. What advice would you give besides branding? You said you were gonna tell yourself, brand yourself at day one. So what would you tell the new person wanting to enter commercial inspections what they should do to get going?
Great question. So beyond branding, which, is for all of us, but anybody, really wanting to, go down the road of commercial inspections, my single, bit of advice, there's plenty that I could say, but I'll stick to this: learn their language. It doesn't mean that you've got to become a certified financial analyst or anything. No, you don't. But you do need to understand what their motivators are. And so we're talking about brokers, we're talking about principals, and we're talking about the end user client, of which 75% of the time, I don't even know who that person is. We have a workflow for that. It's very customary where I don't even know who that individual is or who that group is. And I don't have to know that. Like I said, there's a workflow. But the point is that you're working with a group of people that 9 times out of 10 are pretty savvy, and especially with numbers. And so my single, bit of advice to anybody wanting to, explore commercial real estate is learn the language and put an emphasis on finance terms, how basic algorithms work, whether it's NOI or net, NPV or IRR. And I don't want to bore everybody, but you get the idea of where I'm going, that those are basic financial calculations that you should really hop on with and know what they represent, how they work, and what that number means.
And I would certainly imagine that if you've got a potential client on the phone and you can speak their language, your conversion rate will be higher.
Yeah. I'd attest to that. Absolutely. It's probably, truthfully, it's not my personality. Okay. It's, it's that I can speak their language, and that's probably why I've got, a pretty good conversion rate, out the gates in the first year. I speak their language. It's not because I'm so lovable.
I don't know. You're not so bad, Jeff. Thank you for taking the time today. I know we had a little bit of technical difficulties there in the middle. I sure do appreciate this, and I'm looking forward to seeing what next year and the year after and the year after that hold for you and your operation.
I really appreciate it, Rob. Good to be on here, and I do appreciate all the support, the resources that CCPIA provides. Thank you all for that. So it's a wonderful organization. Thank you.
Thanks again, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff. That was fun. I love listening to people's stories. I love listening to where they've been, where their plans are, what they're doing. And boy, Jeff couldn't been more gracious. Thank you so much for your time, and then those positive words that you talked about with the association. We have so many tools on our website, so many tools available to our members that don't cost anything to use. Just go there, search, find out about what you need in our search bar. We've got plenty there to provide you with that information. If you like this episode, like, subscribe, comment, do all those things that you're used to doing. If you've got something you want to share, if you think you're a member that has an interesting story, if you know somebody that has an interesting story that you want to share, let me know. Send me an email. Send an email right on our website. There's a submission bar. Let us know what you have. CCPIA.org. We're here to help you. Till next time, stay safe. Follow the ComSop.